how can we set up control charts for variables, X bar chart and R chart in Excel? Here is an example data. So I have collected over 25 days, you see here, all the way to day 25. I have collected 5 measurements because my sample size n is 5 for the steer support height, which is the important measurement of a part of a scooter. And you see the measurements are to the fourth digit after the point, they are in millimeters. So these are the measurements for day 1, day 2, and so on. So the first step is I want to calculate the average or the mean, right? In Excel, you can do this using the average function of the measurements. So that's average of this, right? B2 to F2. And I can calculate also the range. I will calculate it here. So that will be a maximum of those minus minimum of those, right? Values. Maximum minus minimum and the average, right? And then what I want to do is I want to calculate it for each of the samples over 25 days. I'm going to copy it and paste it. And you see there are slightly different values every time. And the same thing for the range. I want to calculate it for each of the samples, of the 25 samples collected over 25 days, right? So now, what else do we need? This is the initial values. This is what we're going to do all the time, but we need to now calculate the average of those averages. So what I will do here is I will calculate again an average, right? This is X bar bar. This is the central tendency of those average values that I just calculated, right? This is my average of averages. And I will also calculate the average R, which will be R bar. So that's also average of R, right? And now, once I have them, I will also want to calculate the upper and lower control limit for X bar chart and also for the R chart. And if you recall, the formula here for the upper control limit was take the average value and add the A2 parameter, which I have here conveniently in a table, right? For sample size 5, the A2 parameter is 0.58 and multiply it by the average R bar, right? And so this is the formula for the upper control limit. You see it is somewhat larger than this, 0.963. There's probably another digit 0 here, right? And the same formula I'll put here, but I'll change to minus so that I get the lower control limit. And of course, it is somewhat lower than the mean. These are the 3 values that correspond to the horizontal lines on the control charts. And right, this is the central value, central tendency of what I'm going to observe. This is the upper and lower control limit. It's very unlikely that I should get points above the upper or below the lower control limit. And the same thing I need to do for the R bar, for the R chart. So the upper control limit, if you recall, is calculated as the D4 value, which is right for sample size 5 is this 2.11 multiplied by R bar, and the lower control limit, sorry, by R bar, not by R, right? 0.043. And lower control limit is also R bar multiplied by D3, which in this case is 0. So if we had a larger sample, right, these values would be actually much narrower. The limits would be narrower, and also for the X bar chart, the parameter A2 is decreasing. Right, so these are again the 3 values that correspond to horizontal lines. This is the line for central tendency. This is the upper and lower control limits. Now, because it's easier in Excel to plot even straight lines if you have multiple values for them. I'm going to just put values in this column all equal to the X bar value calculated in the first line. And here, the same way, I'm going to just copy these values. So there will be a bit of redundancy here. But for convenience, I will do this so that we can plot a chart, control charts in an easier way. So I'm going to put equal and then say equal this. And actually, that's all I can write. The same thing here and here and here, here and here. Right? So this is equal. I'm not sure why this is not displaying. Yeah, let's get the general way to display this. Okay, now that I have formulas here, I2 this equals to J2 and this equals to K2, I can just copy this down, right? So basically every time it just takes the value from the higher cell. So all the X bar values all the time, they are the same. And the same thing I want to do here, copy this here, right? Now I have the data ready. So the actual value I want to display is X bar and R. But I also want three straight lines, horizontal lines, X bar, upper control limit and lower control limit for the X bar chart. And the same thing, R bar, UCL, LCL for the R chart, for the range chart. So now that I have the data, the calculations ready, how can I create the charts themselves? But what I will do is I will actually select the first column, maybe a few more cells, like 30 points, and then I will press Control and select also the data for the X bar charts, right? So a little bit more, something like this. And then there are two ways. Either you can use a scatter chart or line chart. I'm going to try and use the scatter chart here and select lines. And notice what I'm getting here is actually the X bar chart. So um, what you can do is resize it maybe a little bit, and you see I have the blue line. I can actually add points to it, right, by formatting and saying the marker options should be, let's say, squares, and you see the points and the lines are actually the upper and lower control limits. You see the legend here, right? We can move the legend perhaps by clicking the chart and clicking design, add element, data, not data, legend, and to the right, and I have a chart that shows me X bar values with the central tendency, upper control limit, and lower control limit. Now remember, we need both charts, R chart and X bar chart together. So I'm going to do the same thing once again, select values up to value 31. Just on purpose, I'm adding 5 empty rows here. I'll show you why, and then press Control and also select the R values, right? And then those R values will be here. And again, I will click Insert, Scatter Chart, and this one with lines, and then I will delete the title, although we could add, right? I will move the legend, add element, legend, right, and perhaps I will change the points on the R values. Markers will be also blue, and then it's just resizing it to make it look, make it to synchronize it kind of with the X bar chart. And you see this is the setup. Right now it is, maybe I'll make them a bit smaller to fit. Right, I have my X bar chart and R chart together. So this is the setup. And remember, the point is, once you set up the charts, you should see, hopefully they are in control. All the blue points are within the upper lower control limits on both charts. And you know what the point is, later on we want to use those charts to control the process. So we will make more parts, we'll collect more samples, measure them, calculate the X bar average value, put another point here, calculate a new range for the new sample, put a point here. So the way we want to work with this is we want to get, right, more data for those charts, and the same, right, we need to calculate later on the average, but we would need the data for it. But for sure we will need to keep the same. If you recall, these were the average, the upper control limit and the lower control limit, average tendency and the limits, that will remain the same for both charts. So I just copy them here, and the same thing, I copy those four values for the limits. And you see those charts are now extending to value 30 with the limits, right? With the central tendency and the limits. And so suppose now I collect a new sample on day 26, and let's say this sample is 79.954079.94, let's say 7879.9790, 79.9533, 79.9601, let's say, and you see actually Excel automatically calculated for me an average and the range, but if it didn't, I would have to copy the formula. And you see now if we scroll down, you see those charts now it have been updated with new points, and you see it here now that the range is around 0.03, the mean is a bit higher than right the central tendency, but it's still within the control limits, right? But for example, if my sample was slightly different, let's say if this value, for example, 9, if this value was, let's say, 9878, right? Then the sample that yes I see here, right, the new number on day 26, as you can see on these two charts, now the value is higher than the upper control limit. So if that happened, right, it doesn't have to happen, of course, on the first day after you set up the chart, but if that ever happens, that's an indication that there is something wrong with the process, because the likelihood of this happening under normal causes, right, in the normal variability is very tiny. It's around 0.3%. And so it's very likely that this indicates some problem in the process, something changed, there is a problem perhaps, and we should investigate to find out what this problem might be and hopefully eliminate it in the future. So we should, of course, continue controlling the process and collect samples for the following days. And this should be done, right? The setup should be done just once. We did it for using the data for the first 25 days. Notice, right? This calculation of X bar bar was done just for the data of the 25 days. But later on, we add data. We do not update the mean, the upper and lower control limits. We just add new sample for day 26, then 27, and so on, calculate the average and the range at a point, and see if the process is still in control. Let's say I'm going to undo my slight change here. In this case, the process is still in control. I should continue collecting the data, updating the chart, and this is going to help me discover some abnormal behavior of the process that I'm controlling, and help me hopefully improve quality or avoid quality problems in the future.